Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday, May 29th, and really we'll hear about another massacre on Saturday. The Zionists choosing people getting out of control. Nobody can control them anymore. The West has been supporting them for almost 80 years. Why quit now? They are used to this. They're used to violation and killing and occupation and stealing and lying. Those young children, young students, they said enough is enough. We cannot tolerate this. We cannot allow the new white settlers to commit the same atrocity and genocide in Palestine. Enough is enough. And they are protesting, they are camping, police brutality. This is the student movement. It started in Columbia University when this Egyptian American, the head of the Columbia University, Professor Shafi, she's the first one to invite and call on the police to come to the camps and brutalize the students. And this is the camp. This is the university where the great Palestinian American intellectual Edward Said built his legacy. Putting a stain on Edward Said's legacy in Columbia University, Ms. Shafi did the unthinkable. She has no sense of history. She is a tool. She is a pawn of the system. She thinks she is in Egypt. She gets order from Sisi. She is a useless as far as head of an organization, useless intellectually. We're going to be talking with Professor Timothy Brennan. He is a professor of culture study, comparative literature, and we really been on our show before. He was a student of Edward Said's, a product of his legacy, and he wrote about 3 years ago or so a book about Edward Said's life, places of. So we're going to be talking with Professor Brennan about what if Edward Said is still with us. Edward Said died 2003, cancer, leukemia, and so what if Edward Said was still with us? What would his reaction? It's like, what would Jesus do? What was he thinking? Is what's happening now really was predicted? Was in Edward Said's analysis of imperialism and Orientalism.
All this took place, or was the reaction from the police and encompassment and all of that. And you can see the images of police arresting those young kids and dispersing the encampments. This all started in Columbia University in New York, and it all started by this Egyptian American, the president of the university, Ms. Shafi. She's the first one to invite the police in campus. And the rest is history. Everybody is emulating now. The student insisting on letting their voice heard. The police is just like any police in any third world country, just a tool of whatever power we have. But I was thinking about making an analogy between, here is an Egyptian American head of a university that has a legacy of Professor Palestinian American Edward Said. He built a legacy there. And so I'm saying she actually put a stain on the legacy, let alone the human rights and student rights and all of that, inviting police to the campus. But in a place where Edward Said, the Palestinian American, built a legacy, as somebody, a student of Edward Said, and you wrote several books. A Place of Mind was, I think, the last one we talked about. I can imagine if Edward Said was still with us, what would be his reaction? What would be his thinking? What would he say? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus say? And it would be very interesting to see. I know we're kind of speculating here, but what do you think of somebody who study Edward Said's mind and place and history and life? What would his reaction be, seeing all this?
Yeah. I mean, he was somebody, first of all, who was quick to point out that the alliances that are formed because of like-mindedness, political affiliations, right, are not only stronger in many ways than the ties of blood and heritage and the ties that come with a certain kind of birth, right, that the importance here is the unification of a number of people of very different pasts and ages, as you pointed out, who are becoming radicalized in the face not only of witnessing what Israel is doing in Gaza, drawing conclusions for the first time about what Zionism actually is in practice. This is probably the only good thing about the current moment, is that it's created that sensibility. So what we're seeing is that American Jews of many stripes and colors and people of all different kinds of nationalities and backgrounds and races are forming alliances, and they're joining together. So the fact that the woman at the head of Columbia University, who disgraced herself and the legacies of the university by crushing student protests in the way that she did, the fact that she's an Egyptian American is of course further proof that identity politics per se is really not necessarily progressive. That it's something that has very little to do with the way people act politically when it's really questions of power and a conflict over interests. So I think that that's probably the kind of point that Edward would drive home, because it's really the kind of point that he was continually driving home as the rise of identity politics in the university was taking hold in the years that he was still alive and writing and active. I think you're quite right to suggest too that Columbia University has a very the students that is here in this particular round of protests against the genocide in Gaza, they do have a kind of pride of place. I mean, there've been demonstrations, and there were demonstrations a long time before things really got hot in April and early May. But it was really the Columbia students who, when things were sort of petering out and dying down, held fast and hung tough, and they were the ones who really invented the symbolic gesture of the solidarity encampment, right? Which is really a kind of allegorical representation of the Palestinian refugee camp, among other things. So yeah, they really do provide a lead here, and they should be applauded for doing that. Now, they have this legacy. I mean, as you say, part of their legacy is the fact that Edward Said taught there and is associated with Columbia University. And clearly the kinds of things that he was at pains to write and inform us about in regard to the Palestinian people and its past and their dispossession, it plays a big part in the thinking. But it's not only that. There is this heritage of protest at Columbia. I mean, people would frequently in their articles talk about the legacies of 1968, but I really don't think that is as important as the legacy of 1985, which is the large protests, which involved the takeover of Hamilton Hall, just like happened in this particular round of protests. This is a protest against the apartheid regime in South Africa, to isolate that regime and to force divestment from companies doing business with that regime. The students were successful in that struggle in 1985. And it was I was a part of those protests as a graduate student. I saw them and participated in them, and I witnessed them. So I really think that historical memory is playing a part here too, with what's happening at Columbia and why Columbia was able to play this leadership role. But Edward, he's so sorely missed here because in this particular moment, which of course is rife with censorship of the sort that we've not seen for many years, right? I think he would be able in this situation to build on his stature as an international celebrity, right? And not just that, he was, the kind of figure, yeah, an intellectual, but he was. I think he signified to many people as an injured, harried clarion of justice, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that this status would have allowed him to penetrate the Teflon shield of the official media, right? Which has never showed as brazenly as it has recently their intention to control the news and define lies as true, to suppress facts, to crush protests, to silence the opposition. I mean, if need be, by killing journalists or threatening to ruin the livelihoods of teachers or the careers of young people. I can speak personally to the fact that I've frequently published in certain venues that now refuse to publish what I'm writing about these events. Okay, I've even been asked by publications to write about the student protests, and they won't print what I write because I'm not simply talking about, the mistreatment of students, but I'm talking about what Israel's doing. And I'm actually kind of citing particulars, and that goes too far for the current press. So I think, to get more deeply into your question about what Edward might do now, of course, we can't really predict what he would do, but I do think that he would have been able, under these circumstances, to summon a kind of personal hurt, right? An urgency, an energetic call to intellectual arms, he was this walking encyclopedia of references to all of the elements that went into the Israel-Palestine equation in the past. And I think that this would have allowed him, and this is important, it would have allowed him to cast the current genocide within its equally genocidal past, right? So, for example, I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but in 1989, he wrote an open letter to American Jewish intellectuals that was only recently published in the journal Jewish Currents, right? And what he gets across there, or if you compare that letter to what's happening now, it would inform us, allow us to see that what we're seeing in Gaza is not, an excessive or vengeful response to the events of October 7th, right? That has led to Israel's collective punishment of Palestinians, which of course, as collective punishment would itself be a war crime. But that's not what we're seeing. This is what's really happening is an occasion or opportunity, an alibi, if you will, to step up and complete the methodical attempt to eradicate the Palestinians as a people and as a nation, culturally, politically, historically, but if necessary, bodily. And this has been Israel's policy for 70 years.
Edward Said was very critical of the left, the liberal, and especially the Jewish left. And he was asking, "Where are you? You're acting like a suburban squirrels. When it gets tough, you just run away, you disappear." And I think your point of fact, this is not about Hamas. It's not about Gaza. It's about the systemic elimination and extermination of the Jewish people. Here you have the Jewish state beheading another state, so to speak. Excuse my pun here, but what I'm saying is, Edward Said was always, of course, he didn't have the space for mainstream media to actually articulate the grievances of the Palestinian. The mind. I'm not going to talk about Europe. A mind of the Americans now. Now you can see people talking and criticizing the Zionist movement, the premises of the Jewish state. They're talking about the Palestinians' grievance and the establishment of Palestinian state and all of this. In a way, the student movement liberated the Americans from this old narrative of Israel has the right to defend itself. Those people, anybody challenge the Israelis are a terrorist, or all of it. make that leap, that the impact that the student movement has on the narrative that has been dominating Americans' landscape for the last 70, 80 years.
It is so important, the point that you're making, because so much of the coverage, of course, by the mainstream press has been telling us that the students are idealistic, they're misguided, they're anti-Semitic, they're this, they're that. They're violent when they're not. The only violence has been done against them, not by them. So it's amazing to me that unlike the Vietnam War, when people, of course, had interest to defend, they didn't want to be drafted. It was themselves whose bodies were on the line in a way there, and that was one of the instigators.
And they didn't vote. I mean, I would say that was young to vote. Voting was 21, I think.
But what's so unusual about the protest here is, first of all, they're extremely multicultural. I mean, they're people of all races and cultures are participating in them. Jews alongside Muslims and everybody in between. So there's that. But there's also that they're motivated by a desire for truth and morality. It is entirely empathetic, and it's a moral movement that has taken political form with very clever organizing and extreme courage. I just can't say enough about how the students have become teachers, right? They're giving everyone else a lesson in where to draw the line, right? And I just, it's beyond heroic. And I think that would be something that Edward, were he alive, would really, really stress. I mean, that what we're seeing in the United States is some of the same incredible courage in the face of seemingly insuperable forces that one found in the Intifada itself, right? Which Edward at one point, in a very different time before people had caught on, identified as one of the most impressive and inspiring anti-colonial liberation movements that the 20th century has ever seen. And I think he's right about that. So what's so important about these protests as well is that it really puts the lie to the claim by progressives who are despondent, who say that protests no longer matter, right? So many people make that argument, and they clearly do. World opinion has been changed, as you point out. But I just wanted to read just a few lines from this open letter to American Jewish intellectuals that Edward wrote in 1989. Okay, 1989. Now listen to his wording, right? He spoke of the bombing of refugee camps, the daringly lawless behavior of Israeli troops towards unarmed civilians, home demolitions, confining people in desert detention camps without adequate space, sanitation, water, or legal charge, and the attempted starvation today of whole towns and camps in Gaza. Okay.
This is like is now. I mean,
yes.
He's like a reporter in Gaza.
That's right. So so what's so important, I think, for us to grasp in the current situation is that this is not simply a lawless behavior in a moment of revenge by the Israeli government. This is a systematic and methodical attempt that has been going on, perhaps not as glaringly or at such a large scale as now, but it's been going on for 70 years. So this is the long game plan of Israel is to wipe out the Palestinians. And that means wiping them out literally, if need be. But it of course, there's other ways in which one can commit genocide according to the UN definition of genocide. And that's just to kind of disarticulate a people and make it impossible for them to collectively be a people, to represent themselves or just survive. So people talk about, the right of Israel to defend itself, but what about Palestinians? I mean,
they didn't exist. I mean, according to the myth of the Jewish state, Palestine did not exist.
And I mean, I'm sure Edward would have made this point. He'd be going like, well, what are we talking about here? In what war? I mean, first of all, it's not a war, it's a massacre. But the official line in the media is that it's a war between Hamas and Israel, right? So even though it's not that, let's just assume for a minute that it is a war. Well, in what war do you demand that the other side disarm itself, that it not have a military wing? I mean, right? I mean, nobody on either side of the conflict in Algeria in the 1950s in France, whether you supported the French Pied Noir or if you supported the liberation of the Algerians, nobody would have thought to say the FLN itself uh, didn't, couldn't exist, right? That it somehow should be wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, they're a national liberation movement. They're trying to defend themselves. They're fighting against intense repression. So how is it that Hamas can just somehow be assumed to be so anathema that it should be wiped off the face of the earth? It doesn't make any sense.
But I mean, the Israelis have been getting away with this for years, and it's but that language is not. Nobody's buying this in.
To see this and heartening up to a point, but of course, there's also what is happening in Gaza, which is devastating. So, I think that Edward, in addition to being a charismatic personality and a brilliant speaker and a tireless advocate, and as I say, an encyclopedic reference point for almost every little detail that has happened over the entire history of the struggle. He was a great organizer. And I think that what he would be busy doing right now is creating new alliances. Given the changing attitudes, he'd be testifying before Congress. He'd be lobbying the International Court of Justice and the UN. I just think that, it's sad that he couldn't witness the changing tides. But I also think that it's devastating for us that he's not here to kind of make all of these various energies coalesce and take on a new organizational form. And I think it would probably have led him to rethink his attitude towards the BDS movement, the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement. He was criticized actually within his own family for being involved in the West East Divan Orchestra with Daniel Barenboim, because it was seen in some circles as the normalization of relations between the Palestinian resistance and Israel, since Daniel Barenboim, although born in Argentina, is an Israeli citizen, although highly critical of Israeli government policies. But I wonder now whether that would, whether he would not be more vocally in support of the isolation of Israel by the concerted efforts of those who wish to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel as a state, as a whole, right? To like object to its participating in the Olympics, to cease all, what is it, exchange programs culturally and artistically and intellectually, just to isolate it the way that people did in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. It seems to me that that is called for now, given Israel's continued, not just indifference, but contempt towards towards international law, and the appeals of, 140, 150 nations. So I think that, and also, I mean, like that 80% of the Israeli public supports Netanyahu after he's been named as a defendant by the International Court of Justice for genocidal crimes. This is like a condemnation.
A lot of people will think this is a Netanyahu issue. It happens. It's been happening for almost 80 years, regardless who is in the helm. I mean, it's all run by the military there anyway. So the idea is it is a Netanyahu thing. The idea is it is a Hitler thing. The idea is it is Churchill. It is those mentalities that you zero in and you make one individual a double, which the double act is done by millions of people.
Almost. And I've never seen a mobilization like I saw for, to protest Israel's siege of Gaza. I mean, there was an activism, a level of energy and commitment that I've simply not seen. There have been other small events over the years, but nothing like this. So, 8 students were arrested at one point. There was a coalition that was formed between faculty and students. They set up their own encampment. Faculty were asked to come and form a cordon around it to prevent the police from, attacking it at night. So some of us would teach during the day and go home, and then we'd come back and join hands and protect the students from, being attacked. We have gone and sat down with the president and provost and made demands of various sorts, more than anything, to urge them to be even-handed, that the public statements they've made showing, empathy and concern for the safety of Jewish students or for the lives lost on October 7th that were Israeli, be matched by statements about the appalling death toll in Gaza of Palestinians and the assault on people, both verbally and physically, who are Arab or Muslim or in support of the struggle against the genocide in Gaza. And they wouldn't meet our demands. They would not make those statements. They're not even-handed about this. So we were doing that. Now, we have gotten, there's been our department, I'm very proud to say, shortly after October 7th, wrote unanimously, with unanimous support from our faculty in our department, we wrote an open letter opposing the siege of Gaza, and it was hard-hitting. The provost has tried to close that down, tried to make us take it off our website. We have refused. There have been efforts by the provost to make this a university-wide policy that no political statements can be made, even with unanimous support, on any of the department websites, and that's being fought out in our university senate. But the university senate, in its majority, to its credit, has supported the right of faculty to make such statements. So there's a lot of these kinds of things going on, and we've at last recently gotten the regents to agree. I think it's the regents who agreed, but at least the university administration agreed to sit down and consider a divesting from the companies that do business with the military wing of Israel or those involved in the occupation of the territories, of the occupied territories. So it's something.
Well, that's wonderful. That's interesting. And I think what's happening in the campus these days alluded to all of this, that people not isolated anymore. People can see these images from Europe, from everywhere. And if your democratic system not representing your voice, you have to revolt. And I think it's a very legitimate. Thank you so much for coming with us, and enjoy the rest of